this course introduction. All right, so when you're done, you can go ahead and pass those up. Bring them to me. And you can get out whatever it is you use to take notes. Now is the time to open those up. Well, thanks. You actually walked them up here. So use you. Thanks. Look at that. People are helping me out. Well, just real quick, there's only like 10 of you in here. Let's see. One person picked Luke. Technically Luke. Arguably Han. Maybe Ben. Okay. Luke and Ben. Okay, let's see. Which time? I like that answer. Hey, if you don't know, there's another Death Star being built right now, right? Of course there is. So, Luke. It seems too obvious, doesn't it? So far, no one's got the right answer yet, though. Luke. Oh, actually, one right answer. Luke with the help of Han. Yeah, we got a couple people that think like MFTers in here, but don't worry, I'm going to convert all of you within the next 10 minutes. So, all right, let's close Star Wars and let's open up the more exciting PowerPoint. All right, so today is a little bit of background, just a little bit of a historical background of MFTs and I guess the environment that MFTs came from, and then some introductory concepts too. That's it. And then we'll say goodbye, and we'll go our separate ways until next week. This first, and by the way, many of you have had me in class before, so you've kind of maybe used to the way that I do the PowerPoints and notes and that. You'll realize quickly that I don't have PowerPoints that have everything on it that you need to write down. I can't stand. I like you with your heads up and not writing stuff down. So this is usually how PowerPoints will be organized, concepts and ideas, and of course stuff for you to write down. But just to get it out of the way, and I'll probably remind you 8 different times, but if you ever feel lost, or you don't know if you wrote the right thing down, or if you wrote the right thing down in the right way, or if you don't know if you're organizing things correctly, just please ask, and I'll sit down with you and I'll say something 18 times if I have to. So as you go, if you feel like you got lost or something, just let me know. And the last thing I want is someone not writing the right thing down just because you missed it or something like that. So this first thing is more about us as a society. And it has an impact. It had an impact on how therapy looks, that question, what therapy looks like. In fact, you fell right into the trap. But it also still has an impact today. The myth of the hero. We just watched Star Wars, right? Which is it's full of heroes, and it's perfect. About 80% of the class. I mean, you didn't give a technically wrong answer. Of course, Luke pulled the trigger, right? But who blew up the Death Star? Yeah. I'm not sure what that means. Sign language. What?
I was talking to myself.
You're talking to yourself. All right. What would you say to yourself?
This will do it, but he's like more.
Yeah.
So it's not like. I was thinking.
I think you're one of the right answer, actually. Well,
No.
So is Luke with Han, Solo, with Chewie, with the droids, with Ben, and all who helped. That was the other right answer, too. It was a team effort. Luke didn't blow up the Death Star. Of course, he's the one that pulled the trigger. But if it wasn't for everybody, that never would have happened. They all played a role. They all had a part to play. And if even one person didn't play that part, this wonderful thing that happened never would have happened. The myth of the hero. What does this mean in our society? It means there's a few points to this. This is actually from the preface of your book. I guess when you have a book that tiny, you use the preface for course notes too. So if you're wondering what today's lecture is from, it's actually from the preface of the book. We're not even in chapter 1 yet. If someone succeeds at something, they typically get all the credit, right? We give people awards. Of course we do. It's a wonderful thing to do. We overestimate our individual contribution to our successes, but we also overestimate our individual contribution to our failures as well. When someone succeeds at something, it's never rarely just an individual effort. It's accumulation of all the people in that person's background that help make this possible. And when someone fails at something, it's also not entirely their fault. It's also a collective effort. I don't use many sports examples, but I really like the new Cleveland Browns coach for several reasons. For one, he's changed my life, and his name is Kevin. But I really like the way he talks after the games. Then the Browns have obviously done pretty well. But every time he's interviewed, now they're starting to kind of make fun of him, like for this on the radio. He never takes any credit at all. He always puts it all on the team, and he's really speaking like this, like how we talk. He never takes the individual credit. But right when a team doesn't do well, who do we fire? The coach. Like we put all the blame. I mean, the coach, I guess he failed at his job, but it's a collective effort. It wasn't like the Browns have collectively sucked for 20 years. It's not any individual's fault. So success or failure, we always point to the individual for both of these when really that's not reality. The second point is something called authentic selfhood, which simply means who you are as a person right now in 2021. So think of how you are. Who are you? I know it's a very deep philosophical question for almost 11 o'clock in the morning. But think of what I mean by that is think of how you act with other people. How do you treat others? How are you in relationships with friends and then maybe intimate partners as well? Who are you? You didn't develop inside a vacuum, like in a test tube. Who you are as a person is a collective accumulation of all of your experiences and interactions with others. The illusion is that you just are who you are. The reality is who you are is accumulation of all of your interactions and experiences with others. Those interactions and experiences form who you are. Of course, you're born with tendencies. I really like the way the movie Soul kind of displayed. I'm sure if you've seen that yet. Kind of display like where our personalities come from. It's kind of a quirky way of thinking about it. So of course we're all born with tendencies. So we're not like negating that. But who you are today as an adult, you've been molded. You've been shaped. Some good experiences, some bad experiences, and bad experiences don't mean you become a bad person, but they all shape you, right? Of course they do. And really, the main driver behind the myth of the hero in our society is this idea of individualism versus familialism. Let me tell you a quick story. I told this on Tuesday. I want to make sure I give all the same example. Tell me how you would feel as the therapist sitting in the room. I don't know what number this family was. The first couple I ever had, my first client sticks out. You'll hear about them. Dave, the second client, sticks out. I'm not sure where this family, I think this was like year 2 or 3 of becoming a marriage and family therapist at the Ohio State University. But I remember all I saw on the sheet was that a family was coming in. And that's kind of how it works. If you go into a grad program, there's usually like a collection of therapists on call. There's like 10 of you, 11 of you, and it's like this random selection. So calls come in and you just get randomly selected. So I was looking through who I was going to have that week, and one of them was a family. And the family, or it was a couple that was going to come in, and they wanted to bring in their 18-year-old daughter because she was having some issues. And at first glance, I thought, oh, goody, because usually couples just want to drop off their kid and say, fix that kid. And then they don't want to have anything to do with therapy. And you spend a lot of time saying, maybe we should all talk. So this was great. I didn't even have to barter for the family part. They were all coming in. So they came in, and the girl was 18. She looked very nice. The couple seemed really nice. They sat down, and, well, this might sound a little bit strange. You can imagine how you would feel if you were me. The couple, well, the daughter explained from her perspective pretty quick. Right away, she started telling me about herself. I'll give you the short version. Really super bright girl. Computers was her thing, like whatever computer science and programming was like 20 years ago. That's what she was into. She had a 4.4 GPA at Columbus High School that she went to, and she had a partial, which was important, scholarship to go to The Ohio State University in her field. She was really excited about this. Everything sounds great. In fact, she was the first person I ever met who had anything beyond a 4. I didn't know you could do that back then. I didn't know you could go above 4. At my high school, you could just get 4. And that we didn't have anything. And anyway, so that sounds good so far. Well, then her parents chimed in when they said, and this is where the problem comes in. I'm like, what? That's the problem. She also had a 14-year-old sister who was not present in the room. The parents did not want her to go to college. Instead of going to college, they wanted her to get a job and work for the next 4 years to help pay for her younger sister's college. And then once her sister graduated high school, then she could go to college. You look painfully confused. How would you feel if you were me, hearing the parents say that? I'm just staring at you because you're staring through my soul right now. Does anybody? You're like, no. I was getting angry. Actually, I'm honest. So part of being a therapist is you have emotional reactions to clients. You're not like some kind of objective, unemotional piece of oak sitting in the room. No, if I'm honest, I was getting like quickly taking the daughter's side because this was the problem in the family. They were having constant arguments because the daughter was saying, no, I've earned this. I want to go to college. I'm 18. I want to go. And they thought she was being horribly selfish for making this choice. I mean, they were going to let her do it. She's 18. There's nothing. But they wanted me. Their goal for therapy was for me to convince her to get a job and not go to college. That's what they wanted their therapy to be. Alyssa's like, no.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Well, there's a little bit more to this story. The parents that I'm not sure what you're visualizing in the room. The parents were originally from Mexico. They were now U.S. citizens, but they spent a really significant portion of their life and their adult life in Mexico when they had come over to the United States. The daughter had only lived in Mexico for a few years, so she doesn't have any memories of even being there. And then they came to the United States. So by and large, she's from the United States. That's all she knows is our culture. If you don't know, I'm not sure how many of you have ever been outside the United States, but from the outside looking in, the United States is viewed as probably, and it's not even close, the most individualistic society on the planet. What do we mean by that? And I'm not putting a value judgment on this. I'm not saying this is good or bad. This just is who we are as a society. What does that mean? I guess we're going down this road of the myth of the hero. What is an individualistic society? And we're not the only ones. It's not like, oh. What do you do if you're dating someone? I mean, or what's romanticized? If a girl's dating the rebel, Johnny, and the parents don't like Johnny, what does the girl do anyway? Dates Johnny, maybe even marries Johnny. Screw you guys. I love Johnny, right? Go against your parents, doesn't matter. Make the choice that's good for you. Do whatever it is that's good for you. We even have like phrases in our society like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? If you're failing, you're just not working hard enough. You're not smart enough. It's all you. We make choices based off of our own goals. This is contrasting with a more familialistic society where people make choices almost instinctively based on what's good for the collective, what's good for the family first. It doesn't mean they don't have their own aspirations and dreams and goals, but many of the choices that they make are based off of what's good for the collective and what's good for the whole. And when people from our society meet other people from those very different societies, we don't understand how those choices are possible. And this is what the parents were communicating to me. They've been having these conversations saying they understand why she's acting this way. And the parents weren't jerks, by the way. They weren't like these cruel, even though you're probably visualizing them like, oh my God. No, they understood what was going on. They said the funny thing is if we still lived in Mexico, this wouldn't even be a problem. This wouldn't be a choice. Of course, she would make this choice on her own because that's how it works. Because in their culture, it's much more familialistic. So just know, so individualistic societies are ones where it's all focused on the individual, almost all the choices that we make. And in a familialistic society, it's the other way around. There's this instant thinking of the whole as being something different. And we are about as far as you get on the spectrum. And again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. It just is what it is. And it helps drive these ideas we've been talking about. Well, because we have this, now we've set the stage, that's kind of who we are. That's where we come from. So, of course, it infiltrates a lot of different aspects of our society. And one place that it's infiltrated that you might not have thought about is the therapy room. But Callista said it perfect. We have historically seen therapy as something that happens between a therapist and an individual. So in a therapy room, it's two people, the therapist and whoever it is that has the mental illness, if that's what you want to call it. Therapy got started like this, and it still carries over today. So just real quick, where does this come from? Well, two rock stars of therapy. We're not going to get too much into this. We're not going to talk about the ego and the superego and all that stuff. But Freud, we got to start here. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Freud actually started talk therapy. If you think talk therapy is a good thing, he had this crazy idea that holding things in would not be good for you. So let's talk to let them out. That'll be good for you. I would actually agree with that. I mean, I have another job because of that. So you see, there are some things that he said that are too wacky. That actually makes a lot of sense. So he started this whole idea of talk therapy for people to help them with their mental problems. If you had a mental problem, he had a name for it. He called it neurosis. Now, this is weird. You don't necessarily need to write this next part down. This is a different way of thinking about mental illness. Back when Freud was doing his thing, I know today we have all sorts of mental illnesses, right? We have general anxiety disorder, and social phobias, and we have PTSD, and we have major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. We have all these very different mental illnesses. Back in the 50s even, so even after Freud, we did not have that. We just had this general thing called mental illness that existed on a spectrum. So imagine if every disease was thought of as the same thing. Some people had it really bad, and some people had it mildly. Well, that's how we thought of mental illness. We didn't have all these categories. If you suffered from what we call anxiety today, that was considered mild mental illness. If you had schizophrenia, that was considered severe mental illness. So it was all in this spectrum. And Freud called it neuroses. So if you had a problem, you had a neurosis. So the next thing to write down about Freud, though, because so far it sounds good, who did he blame? He was the first person to do this. Where did Freud say mental illnesses come from? He didn't say chemical imbalances. Any guesses, Alyssa? As I stare at you awkwardly.
Family.
Family. Very good. See? Hey, I'm off to a good start. I'm going to try again later. See, it's positive reinforcement. Yeah, Freud was the first person to say, your problems come from the family. So the things you've heard about Freud are true. He did talk about your mom. Usually your mom. He gave the dad, like, a free ride. But he did. He talked about your childhood. That's where all this stuff comes from. And that's what Dave, my client, was expecting. He thought I'd lay him down on the couch. Here, lay down. And I turned, no. But here's the other thing to write down about Freud. And now, because so far so good, we're going to have family therapy, right? No. He said, since the family is the root of the problem, the family no come to therapy. Freud didn't really talk like that, by the way. I'd like to think that he did. What? So he blames the family, but then he says the family can't come into therapy. This is where one-to-one therapy came from. His argument was, since they caused the problem, if they come in the room, they're just going to make it worse. Today we see that as counterintuitive, but back then, you got to remember, if Freud said something, we saw it as scripture in the world of psychology, because he's one of the only few people around. So no one's going to challenge this. This is what therapy looks like, one-on-one. Well, there was another guy who also influenced this. A few decades later, our next rock star. Right? If you had a Mount Rushmore of psychotherapy, whether you like him or not, Freud is there, Carl Rogers is there. A guy by the name of Rogers. If you ever took a counseling class, Intro to Counseling, you've heard a lot about Carl Rogers, probably. Carl Rogers, his big idea was this thing called self-actualization. You ever heard of that? Anyone know what this is? You took Psych 110. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid, this is also on there. He talked about it too. What is self-actualization? You want it. This is a good thing. In fact, Rogers would say a perfectly mentally healthy person has achieved self-actualization. Let me ask you this. How many of you are exactly where you want to be in your life, doing exactly what you want to do in the exact relationships that you want to be in? In other words, you wouldn't change a thing. Life is perfect. Really, none of you? It's so sad. You're so young, and yet you've all taken the wrong direction. Well, if you could answer yes to that, you've achieved self-actualization. Self-actualization is essentially you've built the exact life that you want for yourself. Doesn't that sound great? Of course it does. It's what we all want. Who doesn't want that? Well, if you don't have it, there's a problem to varying degrees. I mean, some people are still working towards it. Maybe you're just not there yet. But some people are miserable because of this. To Rogers, this is where mental illnesses came from. People not being self-actualized. The further you away from it, the greater your mental illness. Who did he blame? Your family. Your family is the one that screwed you up. If you're not being who you want to be, we can trace that all back to your family. That's why the words approval and denial of self are up there. His argument was, you've been making these choices for other people. You're marrying who your parents wanted you to marry. You got the job that your parents wanted you to get. You went to the school that your parents wanted you to go to. You joined the swing choir because your mom was in swing choir. You played football because your dad said to. You didn't really want to do, but you spent your whole life not being authentic. So now you're an adult and you don't even know who you are as a person. It's this denial of the self. It makes intuitive sense, right? I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that this is what their issue is. So he blamed the family for this. And just like Freud, he said, they can't ever come in the room. Therapy is one-on-one. So this is what the early MFTs were up against, was this belief. And the thing is, just even questioning this would be like heresy. Like you just don't. It's like believing the earth is flat and you're just not going to listen to anyone else. What do you mean it's round? No, it's this way. So there wasn't even another way of thinking of therapy. Therapy, of course, it's one-to-one. Why in the hell would you want a whole family in the room at the same time? In fact, and then we have one more little slide. We'll get out of here. Talk about intimidating. When I was in this program at Ohio State, I got my internship in a hospital at Ohio State. And I was the only family therapist on this psych ward with a bunch of kids. I'll tell you some stories from there too, probably. But one of my jobs there was I had to teach a class. I had to teach a class to a bunch of psychiatrists who were like 65, 60 years old. They had been like working in their fields for decades. In fact, one of the guys I was teaching wrote 2 of the textbooks that I used in my classes. Like, what in the hell do I have to teach these people? The first thing they told me when I sat, there was only 4 of them, it's not like a big class. The first thing they told me is that, well, I remember one guy leaned over and he said, "How do you do it?" I'm like, "What do you mean, how do I do it?" He's like, "How do you see more than one person in the room at the same time?" He's like, "I just can't even wrap my head around it." This was like 2004, 2005. And this room of psychiatrists who have been doing therapy and what they do for decades, they appreciated it. And that's what I was teaching them. They wanted to learn how to do family therapy because they can't even imagine. It's like, I would be so anxious. How do you navigate this? Isn't that amazing? But that's how rooted we are in this belief that it can't be anything else other than one-to-one. Until the MFTs came along, which they did. This is just some easy stuff and we'll get out of here. The question that separates classic psychotherapy from MFTs is, what's the dominant force that drives people's issues? A pure, classic, historical Freudian psychotherapeutic perspective would say it's all internal. It's all the person, all the individual. You don't need to write down the word intrapsychic necessarily, but the early family therapists questioned that. And they said, no. You're not wrong. Of course there's internal stuff going on. Of course there is. But that internal stuff is being caused and maintained by external forces. And of course, we know the largest external force is your family, because that's where you spend 0 to 18 a lot of your time. You can't escape them. So this was the early battle, was kind of chiseling away at this wall that seemed impenetrable, of changing people's ideas that maybe the internal and the individual isn't the only thing that we need to look at. Maybe there's some value in looking at the family. And there's a quote that sort of describes the way MFTs look at families. It's called the Gestalt quote. It's not just an MFT quote. You've probably heard the quote before. In fact, does anyone know what it is? Coaches use this actually, I'm sure Kevin Stefanski, the wonderful coach that has saved Cleveland, I'm sure he's probably communicated this to his team more than once. Once I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. It's very easy, but you want to write it down. It's like a mantra of MFT. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Have you ever heard that before? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That means a lot. It's a very simple quote. But what you're saying is, sometimes when you get the right people together, playing the right roles, doing what it is that they need to do, this collection of individuals becomes something greater than any of them. The athletic analogy is just easy to use, which is why a team of players with no all-stars on it at all. You can have a team of, I guess average to really good players. They can sometimes conquer a team full of all-stars because they might play together better as a unit than a team full of individuals who just, maybe they play together well, but really they got 2 or 3 guys or girls who really just want to score all the points. They want all the glory. And this team over here who doesn't care about that and just cares about the team can oftentimes beat those teams because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So who changes? Of course, this is easy. In classic psychotherapy, the individual changes. Of course, you came in, you had depression, we're going to fix that, take you home, there you go, no depression. In family therapy, your client is not the individual. Your client is the family system. The whole family changes. Which, of course, means every part of that system changes a little bit in just the right way to fix it. And then I'll leave you with this. You can write this down. I'm not going to quiz you on it, but it's something you need to know. The early family therapists got a little cocky. What I mean by that is they were so excited because it worked. It turns out the early family therapists were very successful in a lot of things. And they thought they had sort of reinvented the wheel. And they fell into this trap of believing that, in other words, they became just as bad as the old classic, it's one-on-one. They said, it has to be family therapy. But there's a danger in assuming, and the early family therapists fell into this trap, that family therapy is always the answer, that it has to be this way, which isn't true at all. Individual therapy has wonderful worth, but so does couple therapy, so does family therapy. In other words, MFTs kind of opened up the world of psychotherapy to say, look, of course it can be individual. I told you from the get-go, 80% of my clients, they're individuals. But there, you'll meet him. There's actually one guy named Carl, who we'll talk about later on in this course. He actually wouldn't even see you. He would give you a list of the people that he wanted you to bring in the room, and if you showed up without one of them, you'd have to go home. He wouldn't even see you. You'd come to the therapy room well, grandma couldn't make it. Get out of here. But he was so popular at the time, I don't know why I just did air quotes. Actually, my daughter Hayden, so she's 9. I don't know if you saw it on TV, but air quotes have been introduced into her universe of things. And for the past 2 weeks, she's been walking around the house using air quotes all the time. I'll walk past her and she's like, hey, Dad. So it's just on my mind. It's probably why I did that. But anyway, you can get out of here. Unless you have any questions. So week 1, all you got to do is the discussion question. That's it. Sunday at midnight. And then in week 2, we'll crack open chapter 1 and do that. But that's